Thank you for that beautiful reminder of what really matters. And what an appropriate song to introduce a sermon on one of the Gospels, where it's all about Jesus. And maybe especially, as we'll see toward the end today, ties in this morning very well. Thank you for that. We're starting in Antioch this morning. You say, wait, I thought we were talking about one of the Gospels. Better turn that on. There we go. Yes, on switches are great. There we go. We're starting in Antioch. And yeah, I know we're talking about the Gospels, but we're going to get there. 13th chapter of Acts tells us about Paul and Barnabas, who are in Antioch. Paul's, Saul at this point, has become a well-known evangelist. He's been preaching in all the towns around, spreading the gospel, convincing people that Jesus is the Christ. And the Spirit speaks to the leaders of the church and says, hey, I have a special job for Saul and Barnabas. Send them out. And so the church does this. They take them, they commission them, and they take off on what we know as the first missionary journey. And they take with them a young man by the name of John Mark. Well, Barnabas is from Cyprus, which is the island right in the middle of the map there. And so the first place they go is to Barnabas' hometown, or home island. And they go there, the three of them, at least three of them, go through this Isle of Cyprus. They're preaching, they're evangelizing, people are getting saved, they're planting churches, it's awesome. And they get through all the way to the other end of Cyprus, head back to the mainland to continue the journey. And at this point, John Mark says, I'm gone, I'm out of here. Now, we don't know why. It just tells us that he left them and headed back to Antioch. And so we can speculate, and of course, Bible scholars love to speculate. Maybe there was illness, maybe it was harder than expected. For whatever reason, John Mark bailed at this point on the journey. Paul and Barnabas continue on up into lower Galatia and evangelizing, planting churches. Eventually, they come back, retrace their steps, get back to Antioch. A little while later, Paul says to Barnabas, we should go check out the churches we planted, see how they're doing. And Barnabas says, that's a great idea. Let's take John Mark with us and do that. And Paul says, oh, wait, no, that's not the plan. John Mark is not coming with us. He bailed the first time around, and I don't trust him. And Barnabas responds, yeah, but he needs another chance. He's proven himself. Obviously, we're filling in a little of the gaps. But very clearly, the Bible says that Paul and Barnabas could not agree on the question of whether or not to take John Mark with them again. And so what they did was end up working separately, which is a great way to do things when we don't agree. There's no suggestion they fought. There's no suggestion they undercut one another. There's no suggestion they held a grudge. They just said, okay, we can't agree on this. You go this direction, I'll go this direction. We'll both work for the kingdom, but we'll work separately for a while. All of you who will be in church leadership or pastoral leadership or leadership of some way, keep that in mind as the way to do things when you don't agree. But moving on. So John Mark goes with Barnabas back to Cyprus, and Paul takes Silas and takes off up across the mainland on his second journey. Barnabas and John Mark kind of fall out of the story because we don't know what they did from there. Doesn't mean they didn't do things. We have many, during this time, there's missionary activity happening all over the place. And Acts just gives us like one series of snapshots of the gospel going to Rome. So John Mark and Barnabas are still evangelizing. We don't know the details. But we do know this. Later in Paul's epistles, he says, writing to Timothy, toward the end of his life, he says, only Luke is with me. Now, Paul is in prison at this point. He says, Luke is the only one still with me. Please get Mark and bring him with you to me because he is so helpful to me. So clearly, this is the same guy that earlier Paul said, no, he's not coming. I don't trust him. Now he says, I really can use him. There's been a change. There's been a reconciliation. Mark has proven himself to Paul and is now asked to be part of Paul's team toward the end of Paul's life. Now, church history tells us that sometime in this range, we're not giving details of dates, but that John Mark has traveled with Barnabas, then has accompanied Peter. Several church fathers tell us that while Peter was preaching in Rome, John Mark was with him taking notes on his sermons, helping him. Then once Peter leaves Rome, the people there in Rome go to John Mark and say, could you give us your notes on Peter's preaching? And so John Mark puts together his notes on Peter's preaching, and that is what we now have today as the Gospel of Mark. It's actually Mark's notes on Peter's talking about Jesus that is the Gospel of Mark. So we have all this backstory to the Gospel. Mark was not an apostle. Mark was not with Jesus much, if at all, during his ministry, but he's taking notes of Peter's preaching. In fact, one church father referred to the Gospel of Mark as the memoirs of Peter. So Peter is very, very much present in the Gospel of Mark. Let me pause there before we jump into the Gospel itself. Different Gospel writers all are writing about Jesus' life, okay? If you'll pardon me stepping into a little bit of teacher mode here, because get some background. They emphasize different details, different things. And so they paint it, it's not just 3 exact portraits, copies, the same thing. They're emphasizing different aspects of what happened, both in the way they put the things together, the way the stories they give, the details they give, the details they leave out. Most of the time, the gospel writers are translating, because Jesus probably spoke Aramaic, gospel writers are writing in Greek, so there's some translation going on for their writing. They'll also often take a conversation and distill it down to a sentence or two. So there's a lot of paraphrasing, condensing going on. So that when we have a quote from Jesus, it's not always his exact words. It's an accurate paraphrase, condensation, or translation of what Jesus actually said. And so some of the gospel writers will quote Jesus slightly differently. It's not a contradiction. They're not fighting each other over it. It's complementary. It's different ways of understanding, or different, if he said, 15 sentences, they can pick out which sentence they quote. Does that make sense? And so what we have in the Gospels is not just 3 of the copies of the same picture. The Gospel writers all have a little different emphasis, a little different perspective in what they're writing. So understanding that, what we find in Mark, one thing Mark does in his gospel is emphasize the disciples' failures, especially Peter's failures in his gospel, more than the other gospel writers do. And again, I'll say it one more time, then move on. They're not contradicting each other. The Spirit has inspired them to give slightly different pictures that we can combine into a more full picture, but they have their own emphases, they have their own points they're making in their writing. And one of Mark's points, based on Peter's preaching, which is very significant, is that Peter was a failure. Peter blew it over and over. He's not in a positive light. He's not showing up as a strong example in the Gospel of Mark. Possibly the most... Peter, there's 2 main things Peter is known for in Mark's gospel. One of them is from the passage that is put on the screen. Now, the high point of several of the gospels is Jesus going to the disciples saying, who am I? Who do people say I am? And the disciples say, well, they say you're John the Baptist or a prophet. And Jesus says, but who do you say I am? And the response then that Peter gives is, you are the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus says, you're blessed for knowing that. The Father showed that to you. And then Mark tells us, so does Matthew, Mark tells us immediately, or right afterwards, Jesus says, now, by the way, guys, understand, I'm heading to Jerusalem. I'll be crucified. I'll rise again. And from Mark, Peter takes him aside and says, oh, no, you're not. You don't say that. You're the Messiah. You can't do this. And notice the way this is phrased here. So Peter takes him aside, begins to rebuke him. So it's not just one sentence. It's a conversation. Peter's like, no, this is not happening. And Jesus turns and looks at all his disciples, makes sure they're paying attention, and then chews Peter out. He calls him Satan in front of all the others. That's pretty extreme. And again, this is Peter's preaching that we're hearing through Mark. He's not trying to pretend to be better than he was. He's like, hey, guys, Jesus called me Satan when I tried to dissuade him from the cross. All right? Peter is not shown in a positive light. Another thing we find, Peter, James, and John all together are with Jesus on the mountain, and this is a transfiguration, and Jesus is changed into a glorified image, and Elijah and Moses show up and start talking to him. And this is fascinating. Again, Mark's the one that really describes this aspect of it. Peter says, Rabbi, we should be here. It's a good place to stay. Let's make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Elijah, one for Moses. But then the next verse all gets skipped. He didn't know what to answer because they were terrified. Ever been in a place where you don't know what to say, so you start babbling, and later you're like, oh my word, I'm an idiot, right? That's Peter right here. They're terrified, and Peter starts talking, and he gets ignored, right? So you're like, well, just pretend you didn't say that and move on, right? And Peter has that personality. Some of us, when we are under pressure, we say nothing. We just, and later think, maybe I should have said something. Other personalities, when they're under pressure, they start talking. That's Peter, and he just babbles, and he's willing to admit, hey, I just was babbling. I don't know what I was saying. I was terrified. I just talked. Embarrassing, right? Maybe the most well-known story of Peter in the Gospels, and Mark certainly shows it. In fact, he emphasizes a little more than the other Gospels. Jesus says to his disciples, you're all going to leave me tonight. You'll flee. And Peter says, no, even if they all do, I won't do that. I'll be with you the whole time. And Jesus responds and says, no, in fact, before the rooster crows tonight, you're going to deny me 3 times. And Peter kept saying, now the other Gospels say Peter said, that's true, but Mark emphasizes it was not just in one statement, it was an ongoing thing. Peter keeps saying, no, I'm not going to deny you. If I die with you, I will not deny you. Everybody else could leave you. I won't. It's this insistent, repeated statement. I will be the one who won't deny you. And obviously we know how that story turned out. And Peter denies him 3 times. Peter failed repeatedly. In fact, it didn't end with Jesus' life. We jump forward, even after Pentecost. Yeah, there was a major change at Pentecost, but Peter was still Peter. He gets to he gets to Antioch. And we were told this in Galatians chapter 2. Paul is in Antioch. Peter comes to Antioch. And Antioch's got a main church, a main sending church, one of the primary churches. And then there's a group of guys that come from Jerusalem. And they say, we're from James. Now, James later said, I did not send them. I was not behind this. But they claimed to be from James. So certain men from James came and said, hey, you Jews, stop eating with Gentiles. They're still unclean. They're saved. They're still unclean. We have to separate. We can't eat together. And Peter went along with them. And apparently, the way it reads, it sounds like because of Peter's influence, then even Barnabas, who is known to be the gentle bridge builder of the Acts, he goes along with it. And so Peter is one of the main ones who is now giving influence to this idea that Jews and Gentiles, even as Christians, should be separate. And again, if we went on, we're not for the sake of time, would find that Paul stands up to him and says, you are a hypocrite. You are undermining the gospel by what you're doing. Stop it. In front of everybody. This is not a private thing. It's intentionally in front of everyone. We're going to chew this guy out. Peter is not someone who's a great example in many ways, including in the book of Mark, especially in the book of Mark. But really, Mark actually paints, I'm focusing on Peter. He paints all the disciples that way. He emphasizes the fact that all the disciples failed, not just Peter. Back to the story of Jesus predicting his death, predicting that he's going to be killed, and on the night of his arrest, and Peter saying, no, I'll never deny you. But if you read a little more there, Jesus starts saying, you will all fall away. All of my disciples are going to take off. And all of them at the end, as Peter's saying, no, I'm not going to, all of them are saying, no, I'm not going to. It's not just Peter. He's in the spotlight, but all of them are with him, saying, no, we're not going to do that. We're never going to leave you. We're going to die with you. All the disciples are there. In fact, some other points real quick in Mark here. None of the disciples are really painted in a very good light in Mark. Mark chapter 4, Jesus has been in the boat asleep, and the storm comes up, and all the disciples are there, and they're terrified. They wake him up and say, we're going to drown. And he wakes up, and he stills the storm. He says, be still, quiet, hush. Then he says to the disciples, why are you afraid? How is it you have no faith? Interesting. The other gospel writers say things like, where is your faith? Or what? Here is like, you guys have no faith at all. You guys need to learn to trust me because you're not showing a little bit. All right, so based on this, it's not a matter of, yeah, you guys need a little better. It's, wow, you guys are really bad. All right? And then their response, they became afraid and like, who is this guy that can stop the storm? Now, again, another gospel writer is emphasizing something else. He says they were amazed. Both are true. Wow, that's amazing power. But part of it is fear. And Mark says, oh, by the way, they weren't just surprised. They were terrified at this man who can actually just speak and the storm stops. They don't seem to learn their lessons very quickly in any way. Similar thing happens later. They're on the boat after feeding the 5,000, and they are crossing the lake, and a storm comes up, and Jesus walks on the water out to them, and they realize who it is. He gets in the boat, the storm stops. And then Mark points out they had not gained any insight from the incident, from the miracle of the 5,000, the miracle of the loaves, which had just happened. But their heart was hardened. This is the disciples he's talking about. This is not complimentary in any way. This is the point in the story, in the life of Christ, when Peter walks on the water. John tells us about that. The book of Mark doesn't. So Peter is not trying to make himself look good. He's not like, hey, but I did walk on the water right there. He's not trying to paint himself in a good light. He's saying, look, I blew it over and over and over. We all blew it over and over and over. In fact, even come down to the end of Mark. And what many scholars, and if you want to know more, ask me later or ask Dr. Phil, he'd be happy to explain it to you. Many scholars feel like Mark's original writing ended here at verse 8 with this. The women who came to the tomb and the angels appeared and said, hey, he's risen. And then the women went out and fled from the tomb. Trembling and astonishment had gripped them. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. End of story. Now, there's debate on why and so on. There's lots of debate there. But here's the point. Even after the resurrection, they're still not getting it. They're still terrified. And even after the angel says, go tell everybody, they're like, not me. I don't know what's going on. Right? The disciples are not painted in a good light through Mark. So what do we do with this? Well, Mark does something else in his gospel. I'm going to point out kind of a literary thing that helps us understand what he's doing. Because his point is not just, they were terrible, we were terrible, and leave it there. All right? He's making a point. And it's not just how bad the disciples were. There's this fascinating structure that Mark has pulled into his gospel. 3 times in the gospel, we have this series of events that actually some scholars refer to as a cycle, because it's clearly 3 times, same event, same order. Jesus predicts his death. He says, I'm going to go and be killed and resurrect. Then somebody fails. Peter fails, some of the disciples fails. So in this case, this is where Peter takes him aside and says, no, you're not, and gets called Satan for his trouble. And then Jesus pulls everybody together and says, we need to talk about discipleship. What does it mean to be a disciple? Then we go on, that should actually be 34, not 24 on the last line there. Then in chapter 9, next chapter, Jesus predicts his death. All the disciples start arguing over who's going to be greatest. And Jesus is like, we need to talk about discipleship. All right, you're not getting the discipleship aspect. Next chapter, chapter 10, Jesus says, I'm going to go and die and resurrect. And that's when James and John go say, hey, can we be your right hand and left hand guys? And he's like, okay, guys. And he looks around, the other disciples are getting upset over it. He's like, okay, guys, let's talk about discipleship. Right? Why would Mark be putting those incidents, and it may have actually happened chronologically that way, but sometimes the gospel writers rearrange things to make a point. They're not trying to write a blow-by-blow, day-by-day account. So why is he emphasizing this pattern over and over in his gospel? I'm going to suggest that the answer to failure is discipleship. It's not just come pray about it again. Pray about it. Absolutely. That's part of it. But discipleship is key to fixing failure. There's 3 stages. Let's be very practical as we wrap it up here. 3 very practical things to overcome failure. And this is what discipleship is all about. Number 1, they accepted correction. Peter got chewed out over and over and over, and he took it. And he learned from it. And when he blew it again and got chewed out again, he took it and he learned from it. They accepted correction. If you get called into an office and corrected, understand there is not a person on faculty or staff or administration that wants you to fail. Correction is being offered to help you. It's not always fun. It was not fun for Peter to stand there and be called Satan in front of all the other disciples. But he learned from it. Learn to accept correction. And moving on in that realm, they never gave up. Yeah, he got chewed out over and over and came back and came back and came back for more. They never, after the resurrection, remember what happens? Mary Magdalene goes and tells Peter and John, hey, we can't find his body. And John and Peter both run. John's younger. He outruns Peter. He stops. He looks in. Peter barges right in. I want to see what's going on here. Because if Jesus is here, I want to be there. If Jesus was here, I want to know where he is. And he's not now. I want to know where he is so I can be with him. All right? He never gave up. Over and over and over. How do you overcome failure? You accept correction when it's offered. You never give up. But there's a third key that is vital. Others never gave up on them. Let's talk about John Mark one more time real quick here. Why could John Mark go from the guy who bailed partway into a journey, into a mission trip, and Paul says, no, well, I'm not trusting him again, to the guy that Paul is saying, hey, send him to me. And Peter has him as his primary, or one of his primary helpers. How did he move from the failure to the guy that the top apostles want to have on their team? It's because Barnabas gave him another chance. And he took that second chance. Others never gave up on them. Let's go 2 directions with that real quick here. Number 1, many of you will be in church leadership, whether officially as a pastor, on a board, or unofficially through influence. Don't give up on people. Never give up on, yes, there are times you have to draw the line and say, I'm sorry, we're at the point now, I've got to act on this. But even that doesn't have to be giving up. Never give up on people around you. God doesn't give up on you. Don't you dare give up on the people around you. The other side is this. Find someone who won't give up on you. Find someone who won't give up on you. I'm not going to open the altar because, frankly, if you're struggling with failure, you've probably prayed many times. And pray again, absolutely. But there's something else I want to do. This is kind of an unusual altar call, but call it an altar call if you want to. I want you to be willing to email, all right? If you're like, I don't know who I can find who won't give up on me, then there's an email, all right? That will go to Miss V, and she is more than happy to step into your life and either help you or find someone who can help you, whether you're struggling with, hey, I need help with praying for this, whether it's there's a place I have failed, whether it's I just have a heavy load right now, I'm concerned about somebody else. There are people here who are happy, who are honored to not give up on you. So go ahead and stand if you would. And seriously, if there's something you're thinking, I'd kind of like to pray about this, pull out your phone and send an email right now. I'm not a problem at all to have people on the phone right now. And to give you a minute for doing that, let me finish the story of Peter. So as you're emailing and just saying, hey, pray for this, or I'd like to talk to someone, or whatever it is, when Jesus resurrected in the book of Mark, and he steps out of the tomb, and the women are there, he says, or the angels, say, go tell his disciples, remember what else they said? And Peter. Because Peter needs to hear it especially. All of them fled, all of them left, but Peter really blew it. Be sure Peter hears this. Go tell my disciples, and especially let Peter know that I'm here and I'm back and he's not been given up on. And then, if I may step over in the book of John as we wrap it up just real briefly here. I love this story. Peter's like, we don't know what to do. Jesus came back, but he's not with us anymore. He just appears and disappears. He's not living. I don't know what to do. So let's go fishing. That's what we know. So others like, okay, fishing. We know that. We'll do it. They're out on the boat fishing. And Jesus, and they're fishing all night. You know the story. They're fishing all night. They catch nothing. Somebody shows up on the shore and says, hey, try the other side. They're like, okay, fine. Throw the nets on the other side. Suddenly it's overwhelmed with fish. And John goes, Peter, that's Jesus. And what does Peter do right then? He leaps in the water. He's just like, he's there, I'm there. And he makes a beeline for Jesus. He grabs his robe. You don't go swimming in a robe usually. You don't put on your outer garment to go swimming. He grabs it, he leaps in the water, and he just like flails his way to Jesus. Because he's not giving up. And that song that was sung is so true. Let's take it to Jesus. And that's Peter's key. He accepted the correction. He found, in his case, Jesus and others who would not give up on him. And he said, I'm making a beeline to Jesus every chance I get. And move from the failure who babbles under pressure and who says the wrong thing and argues with Jesus to the guy who is opening the door for the gospel to the world. That's what power of discipleship to overcome failure. Let's pray. Father, you don't give up on us. Every one of us, every stable Christian on earth has found someone who's not given up on them. And most of the time, the vast majority of the time, that's a person. That's another Christian who's willing to step into their life and say, I believe in you, and if you've messed up, if you've blown it, I'm with you, and we'll see you through it. Father, would you grant every person here to find someone like that? Help them reach out. Help them find someone who can stand by them, who can offer correction, who can be there, say, I'm not giving up on you, and together, let's go to Jesus. Grant that in your grace, and we'll praise you for it. We love you this morning, and we ask it in your name. Amen.
We're glad you joined us. God's Bible School and College prepares students for lives of ministry wherever God calls them. This content is possible because of the generous support of friends like you. To support GBSC, visit giving.gbs.edu. Thank you.